I lied. I didn't actually watch every Superman movie. I watched every live-action blockbuster Superman movie from the 1978 classic all the way to James Gunn's brand new take. I'll be honest, I'm not a Superman expert by any means. I don't read comics and superhero films are far from my favorite genre. I'm more of a serious cinephile, for lack of a better, less annoying term, but I do enjoy a good superhero film every now and then, and over the past week I've gone down a bit of a Superman rabbit hole, and I have some hot takes. So buckle up and stay tuned to the end to hear my thoughts on James Gunn's Superman. And yes, I will do my best to keep things spoiler free, especially for the latest Superman film, but I will be spoiling some elements of the original, so if that bothers you then proceed with caution. After being sent from Krypton to Earth, Clark Kent grows up to become Superman and faces off against Lex Luthor in his first major test as a hero. Superman, 1978, is arguably the most important superhero film ever made. It was the first big-budget, mainstream superhero movie that treated its subject with a level of seriousness, and its cultural and commercial impact can't be overstated. For that reason alone, it deserves respect. It's a timeless cornerstone of the genre that continues to be revered and likely always will be. That said, do I personally think Superman is a good film? Not really. In my eyes, it's a mediocre movie elevated by its groundbreaking status and lasting influence. Let me explain. First off, the tone is all over the place. It swings between campy family fun and bizarre attempts at adult humor, like the infamous underwear scene with Lois Lane. It's as if the filmmakers wanted to appeal to everyone, but hadn't yet figured out how to strike that balance gracefully. Sure, some growing pains are expected for the first of its kind, but that doesn't make the film any better. Christopher Reeve is solid casting. He nails the look and brings some charm, especially as Clark Kent, but the material he's given is paper thin. Superman, as written, is less of a character and more of a blank symbol. His chemistry with Lois Lane is fine, but the relationship feels undercooked. Most of the supporting characters suffer from the same issue. Lois is reduced to a stock love interest, and Lex Luthor, despite Gene Hackman's charisma, is a cartoonish villain whose plans hinge on laughable errors. Jor-El is enjoyable for his brief moments, but nothing especially memorable. I won't harp on the dated special effects, they're a product of their time and easy to look past. What's harder to ignore is the infamous fly around the world to reverse time finale. It's one of the goofiest, most nonsensical endings I've ever seen. Not just unbelievable, but emotionally hollow and anticlimactic. For a film trying to sell us on its grand stakes, the resolution lands with a thud. That said, there are plenty of things to enjoy. John Williams' score is legendary, the depiction of Krypton is visually intriguing, the film has a pleasant, warm aesthetic, and there are genuinely funny moments sprinkled in. I don't hate Superman, but I can't pretend I get much out of it beyond admiration for its legacy. In short, it's a landmark piece of cinematic history, but for my personal taste, it's more intriguing to read about than to actually watch. That's why I'm feeling a 5 out of 10 on this one. I told you I have some hot takes. Superman confronts 3 Kryptonian villains who threaten Earth, all while navigating his growing relationship with Lois Lane. Superman 2 is a deeply flawed yet highly enjoyable sequel that improves on many aspects of the original Superman. While many of the same issues persist, my enjoyment of this film is strong enough that I can almost look past them. What makes Superman 2 work so well is its tone. It leans fully into comedy. The dynamic between Clark and Lois is more believable here because it's given room to breathe. Reeve and Kidder have great chemistry, and this film cements what I've long felt. Christopher Reeve is even more entertaining as Clark Kent than as Superman. He's funny, charming, and completely endearing. The villains, this time around, the trio of Kryptonians led by General Zod, are a blast to watch. Their limited screen time keeps them from overstaying their welcome, and their interactions are often played for laughs in a way that works. Add Lex Luthor into the mix, and you've got yourself an entertaining, if chaotic, rogues gallery for Superman to face off against. As expected for a film released in 1980, the action sequences are fairly dull, but to the film's credit, it doesn't rely heavily on spectacle. The focus is more on character and story, which helps it avoid the bloated pacing and clunky effects overuse that hurt the first film. The visual aesthetic remains strong, classic, warm, and nostalgic, even if the effects haven't aged particularly well. What I appreciate most is that Superman 2 knows exactly what it is: a goofy, light-hearted superhero movie. Its sillier moments are baked into the tone from the beginning, making them more forgivable. Unlike the infamous time reversal climax of the original, which felt jarring and out of place, the comedy in this sequel feels intentional and often effective. That said, the film's flaws are hard to ignore. It's structurally all over the place, conflicts resolve themselves as soon as they're introduced, characters vanish for long stretches, and plot holes and logical leaps abound. Pacing is also an issue. Trim 20 to 30 minutes and you'd likely end up with a cleaner, more consistent experience. It simply doesn't need to run over 2 hours. Still, while I could pick Superman 2 apart all day, I honestly don't want to. It's a harmless, charming film that I expected to be bored by, but instead I found myself having a great time. This feels like classic Superman, in a way the first one didn't quite land for me, and for that I applaud it. I'm feeling a strong 6 out of 10 on this one. Superman battles a corrupt businessman, a clumsy hacker, and his own dark impulses in a film that veers heavily into comedy. Superman 3 is a baffling film, one that raises more questions about its existence than it answers through its content. Not because I'm surprised they made a third Superman movie, but because the approach they took is so odd, so misguided, it almost feels like the film was made by someone who actively disliked Superman. Let's make one thing clear, this is more of a Richard Pryor comedy than it is a Superman film. Superman himself feels like an afterthought, and Lois Lane is nearly erased from the story altogether. Instead, we get Lana Lang, who steps in as the new love interest. I'll give the film this. Lana's attraction to Clark Kent, rather than Superman, is a refreshing twist. It's a nice touch, but the relationship feels forced and underdeveloped. The villain? I genuinely couldn't tell you his name. He's that forgettable. A generic corporate baddie with zero personality, bolstered by Richard Pryor's character who, for reasons beyond logic, becomes his accidental tech genius henchman. Pryor gets far too much screen time, and while he's a comedic legend, his character here is thinly written and wildly out of place. The film opens with some promise in setting him up, but that potential is quickly wasted. And if Superman 2 flirted with being a comedy, Superman 3 dives headfirst into full-blown slapstick, and it's not even funny. The humor feels manufactured and hollow, and with no compelling story to back it up, you're left wondering what exactly the film thinks it's accomplishing. The action is uninspired, the tone is all over the place, and it barely even feels like a superhero movie. That said, there are two things that I like about this film. The evil Superman subplot, while silly, offers a few memorable moments, and again, I appreciated Lana's sincere affection for Clark, but outside of that, the film is a chore. The score is still great, but it's carried over from better films. Visually, Superman 3 feels like a downgrade, lacking in the warm style of its predecessors. Honestly, this film doesn't even feel like a real Superman movie. It feels like a bizarre fan film with a studio budget, a Frankenstein creation with no heart, no focus, and no reason to exist. Surely it can't get worse than this, right? 3 out of 10. I never want to talk about this film again. Superman tries to eliminate nuclear weapons, but ends up fighting Nuclear Man, a strange villain created by Lex Luthor. Superman 4 is, to say the least, a sad final outing for Christopher Reeve's Superman. It resembles a Superman parody more than an actual installment in one of the biggest movie franchises of its time. I honestly have a hard time believing this script went through more than a single draft. Let's get the obvious out of the way. The budget is significantly lower than in the previous films, and it shows in every frame. The special effects are abysmal. We repeatedly see the same reused shots of Superman flying, just with a different background slapped behind him. When he finally faces off against the film's new big villain, Nuclear Man, it lacks any real cinematic scale. It feels more like a TV show than a movie. Speaking of Nuclear Man, what a useless villain. He might have been a good match for Superman if not for one silly detail. He basically shuts down the moment he's not in direct sunlight. Seriously? That's the big threat? Lex Luthor, who returns as the mastermind behind all of this, is just as unimpressive. He's completely lost all the flair and charisma that made him so entertaining in Superman 2. At this point in the franchise, it's hard to even take him seriously as any kind of threat. Lois Lane is back in the mix as Superman's love interest, but the events of Superman 3, including his dynamic with Lana Lang, are never even acknowledged. The chemistry between Reeve and Kidder is still there, but it feels stale, like an afterthought, and truthfully, that describes the whole film. Nothing feels fresh, memorable, or significant. It's all just going through the motions. To make matters worse, Superman now randomly has the ability to rebuild walls with his eyes and speak foreign languages fluently. These aren't charming or clever additions, they're lazy, unexplained plot conveniences. There are a few decent space shots here and there, and maybe one or two jokes that got a chuckle out of me, but that's about it. Most of the humor is flat, and the story is full of plot holes and logical leaps too big to ignore. At the end of the day, despite my issues with previous entries, it's genuinely disappointing to see Reeve's Superman go out like this. Superman 4 is the lowest point for the character on screen, cheap, lifeless, and creatively bankrupt. it's a whimper of a finale for a once groundbreaking franchise. That's why I'm giving this one a 2 out of 10. After a long absence, Superman returns to find the world changed and Lex Luthor plotting something dangerous once again. Superman Returns feels like the odd one out of the Superman franchise. It's a strange hybrid, part sequel, part reboot, and unfortunately, I don't think it succeeds on either front. That said, there are plenty of things to enjoy about the film despite its major flaws. Kevin Spacey makes for a fantastic Lex Luthor. He brings a much needed darkness to the character and gets plenty of moments to showcase his acting chops. As for Brandon Routh, he's fine. He does what's required of him as Superman and brings some charm to his portrayal of Clark Kent. The dynamic between him and Lois Lane is a little undercooked, but not without merit. The action set pieces are actually quite good when they show up. The problem is, they're too few and far between, which leads to one of the film's biggest issues: it's too long for its own good. The first 75% feel dull and meandering before things finally pick up in the third act. I genuinely enjoy that final stretch of the film, but the journey to get there is often stale. And stale might just be the best word to sum up Superman Returns. The color palette is muted, the dialogue is uninspired, and the sense of fun is nowhere to be found. I'm not against a more serious interpretation of Superman. In fact, I often found the campiness of the earlier films to be excessive, but serious doesn't have to mean dry. The story here is far too simple and safe for what's supposed to be the grand return of one of fiction's most iconic heroes. You would expect something bolder or more ambitious, but instead, it feels oddly throwaway. Honestly, I'm struggling to think of anything else to say. This isn't a film that invites much conversation, it just sort of exists in its own little bubble destined to be forgotten. It's far from the worst Superman movie, but it's easily one of the most unremarkable. 5 out of 10. Clark Kent discovers his origins and steps into the role of Superman as Earth faces an existential threat from General Zod. Man of Steel is an obnoxious, borderline mind-numbing film, and yet it means a lot to me. When I was 8 years old, I saw it in theaters, and to say it blew my mind would be an understatement. I was completely mesmerized by the sheer scale of it, rewatching it obsessively until my taste gradually shifted towards more serious films. Still, Man of Steel has always held a special place in my heart, and even now, over a decade later, I still get a kick out of it. If we're being real, this film is a mess. The writing is surface level at best, the action is wildly over the top, the plot holes plentiful and hard to ignore. In most traditional senses, Man of Steel is a bad movie, and yet there's a lot to enjoy about it. Hans Zimmer's score is phenomenal, easily one of the film's strongest elements. It's powerful, emotional, and in my opinion, perfectly captures the spirit of Superman. The visual effects are another major strength. While the film drowns in CGI, the effects still look fantastic, especially considering the time it was released. Now, let's talk about the action, because that's where the film becomes divisive. For many, the extended, destructive fight scenes are a deal breaker, and I get it, but for me, they're the reason I keep coming back. What other movie gives you superheroes flying through buildings, demolishing satellites, and beating each other to a pulp so unapologetically? It's absurd, sure, but as a kid, it was cinematic euphoria. Even now, I find a kind of escapist thrill in it. You can call it a guilty pleasure, but I don't feel guilty. Zack Snyder has his flaws, many of which are on full display here, but he also has an undeniable eye for visuals. Man of Steel has plenty of striking imagery and moments of visual storytelling that still resonate with me today. Man of Steel is deeply flawed, but it's also entertaining, emotionally resonant in its own clunky way, and a film that continues to mean something to me. Sure, it may be cinematic junk food, but sometimes that's exactly what I'm in the mood for. I'm giving Man of Steel a 6 out of 10. Superman's presence divides the world, prompting a paranoid Batman to take action, just as a greater threat begins to rise. Batman v Superman is the very definition of a mixed bag. I can see the ambition in Zack Snyder's vision and genuinely appreciate what he was going for, but I also can't shake the feeling that the film would have fared much better in the hands of someone more capable of translating those ideas into a cohesive, compelling narrative. The bones of this film are solid, but nearly everything built around them feels flimsy or just flat out incompetent. Let's start with what works. Ben Affleck, surprisingly enough, makes for a good Batman. Like Henry Cavill's Superman, he looks the part and delivers a solid performance. Not that the script gives him much range to work with, but whenever the film's focus shifts to Batman, I'm at least somewhat engaged. Unfortunately, I can't say the same about Superman or Lois Lane, who often feel like afterthoughts. It honestly feels like Snyder only wanted to make a Batman movie and was saddled with Superman as a co-lead. Wonder Woman's inclusion is even more jarring, completely shoehorned in and tonally out of place. Hot take? Jesse Eisenberg actually makes a great Lex Luthor. Unconventional? Definitely. But I love the neurotic, entitled energy he brings to the character. He's annoying, bratty, and calculating. Sort of like if Mark Zuckerberg had a god complex. Oh wait. Sure, his plan is a convoluted mess, but Eisenberg himself is fun to watch. Visually, the film has plenty going for it. As I always say, Snyder might not be a great storyteller, but his eye for striking imagery is hard to deny. He knows how to frame superheroes with grandeur, and some of the action sequences, particularly the Batman vs Superman showdown, are genuinely thrilling. That is until Martha happens. The third act, unfortunately, nosedives into CGI soup with the Doomsday battle, which feels more like an extended PlayStation cutscene than a climax. Anyways, I've probably said all the good things I can about this film, and even then, I couldn't help pointing out the flaws in those positives. Batman v Superman is, undeniably, a mess. Even its biggest defenders would likely admit that. Somewhere buried in this film is a great story, but that's not what we were given. Instead, we got a bloated, clumsy setup for Justice League that wastes one of the most exciting matchups in comic book history. I'm giving this one a 4 out of 10. What a waste. A modern take on the iconic hero, this version of Superman juggles heroism, idealism, and public perception in an increasingly cynical world. I'll just come out and say it. James Gunn's Superman is, in my opinion, easily the greatest Superman film ever made. He takes a familiar story and makes it his own. A light-hearted, campy, yet smart and politically aware film about standing up for what's right. It's by no means groundbreaking, but it's thoroughly well executed and refreshingly sincere. David Cornsweet is a fantastic Superman. Not only does he look the part, but this film's version of the character is the most grounded we've seen on the big screen. He's emotionally and physically vulnerable. Not some untouchable god, but a person using his extraordinary abilities to help others. We don't see a ton of Clark Kent in this film, and honestly, there's not much distinction between Clark and Superman, but that's more of an observation than a criticism. His relationship with Lois Lane is the most believable it's ever been, and their love feels real and earned. Nicholas Holt's Lex Luthor is a strong addition. He's malicious and calculating, posing a genuine threat to Superman throughout. I also got a surprising amount of enjoyment from Krypto the dog. I was skeptical about his inclusion, but he won me over quickly. Krypto adds a layer of warmth and personality that would be sorely missed otherwise. The rest of the supporting cast is solid too, making this version of Metropolis feel fully lived in. One of my favourite aspects of this film is the pure spectacle of it all. This film features the best flying sequences in any Superman movie to date, hands down. The action sequences are thrilling, with great pacing and flow, and the visual effects are truly stunning. The musical score is also on point, evoking the classic Superman feel without sounding dated or derivative. The story is fairly simple, but that's not a flaw. It's a classic Superman narrative with just enough twist to keep it feeling fresh. What stands out the most is the film's willingness to wear its politics on its sleeve. This is a story about right and wrong, and it proudly takes the right stance. That alone earns it respect in my book. But it doesn't stop there. The film also delivers an entertaining, self-contained experience that sets the stage for more without feeling like it's just a prelude. That's something the DCEU consistently struggled with. Of course, I do have a few minor issues with this film. Without getting into spoilers, there's a moment where public opinion shifts regarding Superman, and the justification for it felt unconvincing. It's a small thing, but it pulled me out of the story for a moment. The film also leans into cheesiness at times, usually in a charming way, though it occasionally tiptoes over the line. Lastly, while the film is excellent, it doesn't take many risks. Apart from a few details, it plays things pretty safe. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does keep it from reaching true greatness. Still, it should be obvious that I had a blast with Superman. It's a breath of fresh air in a genre that's felt increasingly tired, and for the first time in a long while, I'm genuinely excited to see where superhero films go next. That's why this one gets a strong 7 out of 10 from me. You did it again, James Gunn. Anyway, that was more than enough Superman for 1 week. Here's my ranking of the films, and I've gotta go watch a Lav Diaz movie or something just to cleanse my palate. Still, I had fun doing this, and I'm genuinely curious to see what they do next with the character. And hey, I think that's all I've got. See you next time.